Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Recreational Trails Program, the RTP workshop. Um, Before we get started, I'd like to have the team introduce themselves. These are the individuals who will be taking you through the guide today and answering any questions that we may come up. So at this point, team, introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Cedric. Hi, everyone. I'm Victor Bertino, Program Manager, and please introduce you to Richard Rendon, who's the Trails Administrator for the state of how many years, Rich? 15 years or so.
15
thank
years, yes. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Richard Rendon. I am the supervisor as well as the state trail administrator for the Recreational Trails Program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Schilp. I'm a project officer here with OGALS. Welcome to today's webinar.
Hello, my name is Julianne Coronado. I'm also a project officer here at the Office of Grants and Local Services. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, my name is Kyle. I'm one of the competitive review project officers, and thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Lambert. I am a project officer as well, and I will be presenting with everyone else that just introduced themselves. And I just want to introduce our colleagues working behind the scenes to make this workshop run super smooth. We have Sam Cadeau, who's doing our screen share. Thanks, Sam. We also have Megan Harrison, Adela Valdez, Esmeralda Bermudez, Julie Jenkins, and Natalie B. We hope you enjoy and really learn a lot during this workshop. Thanks.
Thank you, team. And my name is Cedric Mitchell. I'm the Deputy Director for Community Engagement, which oversees the Office of Grants and Local Services. Today, we are going to be talking about an estimated $6.7 million that will be available through the Recreational Trails Program, or RTP, which we'll refer to from this point forward. This program is to fund trail projects for pedestrians, bicyclists, and equestrians within our state. The maximum grant request is $2 million. There is no minimum request. The RTP is administered at the federal level by the Federal Highway Administration and at the state level by the California Department of Parks and Recreation, our Office of Grants and Local Services, or OGALS as it's referred to, and also the California Department of Transportation. Motorized trail projects are administered by the Department of Parks and Recreation's Off-Highway Vehicle Recreation Division and Caltrans. Trail activities promote health and the well-being and connect transportation corridors. The RTP ensures that the benefits of trails are accessible by our diverse communities. As of January 2022, California has been funded for 424 projects using $78 million in RTP funds and $45 million in matching funds. We're very excited to discuss this opportunity with you today. We hope that you will find it enriching and that it will inspire your creativity and innovation. At this time, I'd like to reintroduce Richard Rendon, and we'll get started. Richard?
Thank you, Cedric. Thank you again for being here with us today. For today's webinar, we'll be working out of two documents. The main document is the Recreational Trails Program Procedural Guide, and the second document is the Frequently Asked Questions document, or otherwise known as the FAQ. Both can be found on the program website. Nikki will put the link for the website and the FAQs in the chat box in case you didn't bring them with you today. Before getting started on the program's technical assistance, I would like to call your attention to a few Microsoft Teams features participants should be aware of. The first one is the chat feature. Sam is circling where the chat feature can be found. Please use the chat feature to ask questions. We will be monitoring the chat feature and answer questions directly into the chat. Victor, at times during this webinar, will also be addressing some questions out loud. If there is a thumbs up, a heart, or smiling face icon next to a question, that is just our way of communicating with each other internally as to whom will be responding to your question. For those who do not see the chat feature or are having sound issues, past participants have been able to solve those issues by exiting and re-entering the workshop. Please keep questions related to the topic we are discussing. For example, if there is a question related to the California Environmental Quality Act, otherwise known as CEQA, please hold your questions until we are covering it in our presentation today. Please, we ask that you ask as many questions as you want. Questions are definitely encouraged during our workshops, as they do help add to the workshop experience. The second thing are technical issues with sound or video. As I mentioned above, a lot of issues are resolved by exiting and re-entering the workshop. If you continue to have issues after that, please email OGALS, that's OGALS, @parks.ca.gov. Nikki will post the email address in the chat box. If there is an audio issue, please send in your phone number to the OGALS email, and we can dial you directly into the workshop. Megan will be monitoring that account and will assist with any technical difficulties. I should let you all know that this workshop is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Recreational Trails Program website. If there is a complete internet connection loss on your end, be assured the workshop will be posted on the Recreational Trails Program website no later than the end of next week. And finally, closed captioning. Sam is showing where the closed captioning can be accessed. He's circling the three dots. You click on that, go down to language and speech, click on that, and then you can turn on your live captions in case that is a feature that you would like to use. Okay, let's take a quick look at the Recreational Trails Program website and the links to the application process page and the grant administration page. For our purposes as applicants, we are going to look at the main and application process pages today. First, let's take a little peek at the application process. Where Sam is circling that. So here's the application process. You'll notice that the first thing right off the bat, the very top, is the deadline for this year's application. And so that deadline is June 15th, 2023, and applications must be submitted before 5:00 p.m. on that date. You'll notice just below that, there is a button to click to submit your application. Keep in mind, and we'll remind you several times throughout today's workshop, that we are no longer accepting hard copy applications via postal service. All of our applications must be submitted via this feature here, which is our online application using Submittable. Right underneath that, we have the links to yesterday's and today's workshops. Next is the application guide. And that's the application guide that we'll be using for the 2023 application cycle, as well as we'll be going through today. Underneath that is the frequently asked questions document. So Sam, go ahead and click on that. Okay, so this document here provides additional clarifying information based on questions we have received during the previous application cycles. And it is an important companion document to the guide and will help further clarify items found in the guide. So as we go through today, it'd be good. Our project officers will be referencing both the page number of the guide, as well as the companion document, the FAQ document. You'll also notice here in this document that it is structured along the same lines as the way the application guide is structured for this program. So it has a lot of little tidbits about things to watch out for when you're doing your checklist items, as you can see here. And at the beginning, at the bottom of page 6, is where the grant proposal guidance begins. And so this area will be used. So this has further explanations or just little nuggets of information that you can use when you're going through the criteria and responding to the criteria. Okay. All right, Sam, let's go ahead and head back over to the web page. Okay, and then next you'll see we have the eligible applicants, which are cities, counties, districts, state agencies, federal agencies, as well as nonprofit organizations with management responsibilities over public lands. You'll also see a link for match requirement and eligible match information, which we will discuss during this workshop. After that, there is the authorizing resolution template for you. And also there's a link for the post-selection federal requirements. We do encourage all applicants to familiarize themselves with these requirements. This section is for those applicants who will be recommended to the Federal Highway Administration and must complete these requirements prior to being recommended for final approval. We will also discuss these today. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the Recreational Trails Program main page. Here, applicants will find the link to the application process page, which we were just on. The post-selection requirements page. The grant administration page. Those who are approved by the Federal Highway Administration will use this page upon approval and during the project period. Next, we have the press release for those 2022 Recreational Trails Program applicants that will be recommended to Federal Highway Administration. After that, we have a little section on the program overview, which shows the breakout of funding. After that, we have the program history. And then from there, we have the partnership opportunities. Please note that this is linked to Criteria 14 Service Corps in the application guide. Applicants are encouraged to develop an agreement with a service corps. We have provided the link in the California Conservation Corps to assist applicants in getting the conversation started. And we definitely recommend getting started early with this consultation with the Corps. Then you'll see additional resources. Provided here are links and information on resources that applicants may find useful. Note, Caltrans's Active Transportation Program is also another really good source of funding for non-motorized trails in California. Now I will have Sam bring up the workshop agenda. This workshop will focus primarily on the Recreational Trails Program procedural guide, as well as the FAQ document. Both are posted on the program website, as we just showed, and also asked you to have them for today's workshop. This agenda provides an overview of the topics we will be covering during today's workshop. So right now we are going over the agenda, the top part under introductions and workshop orientation. Once we're done with this, we will delve into the program overview, which are located on pages 3 through 16 of the RTP application guide. Then after that, we will talk about application form, as well as the project proposal criteria 1 through 14, which is located on pages 23 through 33 of your application guide, as well as beginning on the bottom of page 6 of your FAQ document. Once we're done with that, we will take a 5-minute break. Then after that, we will talk about the application checklist overview. Note that it is the list is on pages 20 through 22. So our team will walk you through each one of those checklist items. After that, we'll talk about application forms and eligible costs on pages 34 through 43. And then finally, at the end of that, we will have a closure by our Deputy Director of Community Engagement, Cedric Mitchell. And then after that, if we have time left, we will open it up for questions where you can just raise your hand and we'll open up your mic and you could go ahead and ask a question if you'd like. Okay. Sam, go ahead and let's go to the timeline. So here you'll notice the very top row, February and March of 2023. This is where we currently are, and this is our last application webinar. So between now and June 15th, 2023, by 5:00 p.m., which is the application deadline, is your time to begin working on your application if you have not started already. Then after the application deadline, our staff will conduct application reviews of all applications received by the deadline on June 15th during the summer of 2023. Sometime in the fall of this year, our department will announce recommendations for RTP projects to move forward. Now, for those projects that are moving forward, you will enter into phase 2 of the process, and that is you must complete the federal requirements stated here. So the first one is the National Environmental Policy Act. After that, you would also have to complete Section 106 and then have your project listed on the local transportation improvement plan. For those of you who are interested in acquisition, there is a fourth federal requirement that you must complete, and that is the Uniform Appraisal Standards for Federal Land Acquisitions, otherwise known as Yellow Book Standards. So once these requirements are complete, once those are complete, then we can package up your project application documents and forward it over to the Federal Highway Administration for funding recommendation. And also you want to take a look at the bottom of that in bold. It talks about that these requirements may take up to a year to complete. And so just be sure that you add that into your project timeline going forward. So once it goes over to the Federal Highway Administration, they have 15 working days to approve the project. And so what does that lead to? That leads to each grant performance period for each individual project will have a unique start date, because that start date begins on the date of federal approval. And your end date will be unique also, because prior to us sending your project over to Federal Highway, we're going to ask you for a milestone plan as to when you plan to start the project, all the way up until project completion. And so it can be anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So just keep that in mind. And then hopefully all these projects will be ready to roll and ready to construct or acquire prior to the fall of 2025. I think with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Nikki, and she will get us started. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rich. Appreciate that overview. All right, so before we jump into the criteria, let's talk about eligible and non-eligible projects. So we're going to turn over to page 13 in the procedural guide or application guide, and we're going to look at the eligibility. So remember, Richard mentioned that the frequently asked questions document is that companion piece to this guide. And so eligibility can be found on pages 2 and 3 of the FAQ. So as we can see, there's non-motorized and motorized projects, and they have different eligibility. We share the same guide, although for purposes of this workshop, we're going to be strictly looking at non-motorized. So eligible non-motorized projects, which is found in the left column there, include acquisition, construction of new trails or expanding and linking trails. And please note here that no higher priority is given to either paved, decomposed granite, or natural trails. Also eligible is development and rehabilitation, which could include things such as fixing an underlying problem, such as drainage and reconstructing an alignment, resurfacing a trail, because maybe that trail's life expectancy surface has passed. And then maybe you want to change the type of surface. So you want to go from paved to non-paved or vice versa. That's eligible. And I do want to mention here that landscaping and habitat restoration is only eligible when it is needed to prevent any kind of trail degradation, and if the landscaping will be directly adjacent to that trail, or if habitat restoration is needed where a trail is being realigned and that old trail alignment is going to be decommissioned and then restored back to a natural state. All right, so please turn to page 14, types of ineligible projects, and that's on page 14. Ineligible projects can also be found on pages 2 and 3 of the FAQ. So on page 14 of guide, there is a long list, as you can see, of the types of ineligible projects. I'm just going to name a few here. 1, acquisition, which involves eminent domain of any kind. 6, projects involving highway construction. 9, a project solely for trail planning. 12, projects required as a mitigation measure as a condition for a permit or other entitlement. And 14, projects that do not have public access. And please note here that projects focused on routine maintenance is not eligible. So we're going to turn to page 25 in the guide, and we're going to look at project proposal. Project proposal is found in our guide companion, that FAQ document on page 6. And I would like to point out that the project proposal is a checklist item. And that's checklist item number 13, and it does include all the criteria, and the criteria are numbered 1 through 14. So while most checklist items that will not be completed by the deadline can have placeholders, say like your authorized resolution won't be signed in time, you can put a placeholder in there. But with this one, checklist item number 13, the project proposal, you want to have that, applicants should have that completed and finalized by the application deadline, as that criteria, the 1 through 14, that's how applications are scored. So you want to make sure checklist item number 13, project proposal, and the criteria are complete by deadline. So each criteria has an accompanying scoring rubric and is an opportunity for applicants to gain points. And you can see there at the bottom of the page here, number 1 in the box, that's the scoring rubric. Thanks, Sam. Every application starts with 0 points, and there are 100 points maximum to be gained. Now, applicants should conceptualize and propose a project to score the most points. Before we jump into that criteria, I just wanted to acknowledge that, again, the application guide or procedural guide and that FAQ document go hand in hand. We posted the links in the chat for you to access them if you wanted to take a look. They're on the website. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that FAQ document right now. Thanks, Sam. So remember, we said these go hand in hand together, and these frequently asked questions, this document was created using all the questions, submitted by applicants over the many years of doing the RTP program, RTP, non-motorized. So, this is years and years of questions that have been asked to make things more clear for you. So Richard did mention this, I'll say it again today, as each presenter discusses each of the criteria or a checklist item, they will also let participants know where this topic can be found in the FAQ. And as you can see in the FAQ, it tells you what page in the guide that particular criteria checklist item is. So we can see criteria number 2, solutions to the deficiency, is found on page 26. So, okay, let's do this. Let's jump right into the criteria. And this is starting on page 25, and we'll see at the bottom, like we did a little earlier, criteria number 1, deficiency. And this is found on page 7 of the FAQ document. Now, applicants should describe why the project is needed, which is basically you're telling us, what does the trail lack? So please note the scoring rubric below the criteria. I pointed that out a little bit earlier. So the rubric shows that projects in an area without trails that help complete an important system or that correct major design or construction deficiencies gain the most points. But I'm going to tell you, keep in mind that the greatest deficiency someone can have is not having a trail at all. All right, so we're going to move over to page 26 and look at criteria number 2, which is our solutions to deficiency. Now, this criteria is also on page 7 of the FAQ. And so we know that criteria number 1 is where the applicant establishes the need. So criteria number 2 is where the applicant establishes the solution for the need. So applicants should discuss how the project addresses the deficiencies that are found in criteria 1 by describing how the project will significantly increase use, improve access, and or protect resources. And I'm just going to give you all some examples here. So if an area lacks trails, then the need in criteria is no trail at all. And the solution here in criteria number 2 is creating a new trail. And we can also have reconstruct or relocate trails to increase usability and or access, reconstruct non-sustainable trails, rehabilitate or relocate old trails to reduce environmental impacts. So I'm going to note here that non-motorized trail maintenance is ineligible. Maintenance includes items such as clearing and brushing, trimming, seal coating of paved trails, painting, and other similar items. Sam highlighted that there for you. And next up on page 27, we're going to talk about criteria number 3, which is the connectivity. And this is found also on page 7 of that FAQ document. So applicants are asked to describe how the project joins or is part of a trail system. Applicants will want to look at providing connections to or that are a part of a regional, state, or national trail system, as those do receive the most points, as you can see that in the rubric there. So if there is no connection to a regional, state, or national trail system, or the project is not in a park at all, the application, as you can see, will score 0 on this. And we do want to note and mention that park can also mean open space, if that space is designated for recreational use. So please use that chat feature as you've been doing if you have any questions, and then I'm going to pass the workshop over to Kyle.
Thank you, Nikki. So we're going to stay here on page 27, and we're going to be looking at criteria number 4, linkages. Linkages can also be found on page 7 and page 8 of the frequently asked questions document. So the linkages have 2 metrics. The focus is on trails within a town or city that connects to a population center or gathering areas to a recreation area. The key here is the trail must link where people live or gather to a recreation destination and be separated from highways. Applicants should describe how the project connects to these population centers, as well as noting the proximity of the project to highways and or any major roadways. Please note that trails may be located along a highway as a connector where no other feasible route exists. Trails must be separated from a road or not within the road right-of-way. Anything that extends into the road right-of-way is not eligible. Separation can be distance or physical barrier. Trails that are separated from a highway are more of a priority and more competitive. If the trail is adjacent to a highway or road, applicants should explain why it is not feasible for the project to be located further from the highway or road. As you can see in the scoring rubric, we have major and minor links. A major link is a trail that is used by at least an entire city or town as a trail that connects to a popular recreation destination. An example of a major link would be multiple towns to a state park. A minor link is a trail that is used by a neighborhood that ends in a recreation destination. A minor link example would be a neighborhood with a city park. Keep in mind, this is about the linkage created through this project, not future trail segments. On page 28, we will see criteria number 5, number of project users. And for you guys using the frequently asked questions document, criteria number 5 is found on page 8. Applicants should provide an estimated number on the average annual visitation of users to the project. Applicants may want to look at nearby trails, campgrounds, resorts, or other outdoor recreation features, and its actual annual visitation numbers to create a realistic estimate. OGALS acknowledges that there are various methods to calculate the number of users and understands that this may be difficult for new trails. Therefore, the applicant should consider the reasonable probability that the trail will have high, medium, or low use based on the location of the trail and its intended use. Scrolling to the bottom of page 28 is criteria number 6, project user accessibility. Criteria 6 starts at the very bottom of page 8 of the frequently asked questions document and then continues on to page 9. Applicants should provide a description of how the project is accessible to all populations, including people with disabilities. The highest amount of accessibility means no Federal Access Board FAB departures are needed and gain the most points. For non-paved trails, applicants will cite the Federal Access Board FAB guidelines. The intent is to enable non-paved trail developers builders to make trails fully accessible. The FAB guidelines allow departures. They outline the conditions that permit departures and which or what types of departures qualify. If a departure is needed, applicants should cite FAB guidelines along with an explanation on the need for the departure. Some examples of a qualified departure are FAB compliance is not feasible because of terrain or prevailing construction practices. There is a conflict with mandates such as Endangered Species Act and other laws, or compliance would fundamentally alter a site's function or purpose. For paved trails, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO, design standards must be used for paved trails. A statement declaring the applicant is using AASHTO standards is acceptable. If the applicant does not provide any response to criteria 6 at all, or fails to attempt to follow the FAB or AASHTO guidelines, the project will be determined ineligible. Next, we're going to turn to page 29 for criteria number 7, which is access to the project. Criteria 7 is on page 9 of the frequently asked questions document. The intent of this criteria is to know how applicants will have access to the trail or trailhead. This is not about FAB or AASHTO guidelines or departures, as we just spoke about for criteria 6, but rather, how do people get to the project from work or their home? We want to know that this criteria works in conjunction with checklist item number 2, the site plan, which is found on page 20 of the application guide. The site plan should include the access points. Let's take a look at the scoring rubric. We can see the following qualities for unlimited access can help applicants gain more points. It is easily accessible to all, be it through a parking lot, public transportation, bike lanes, etc. There are no or few barriers such as major thoroughfares. At the bottom of page 29 in the guide, we'll find criteria 8, points of interest. And just like in the guide, criteria 8 is found at the bottom of page 9 of the frequently asked questions document. Applicants should discuss how the project will view and interpret natural, cultural, historical, or scenic characteristics. A good example would be a lookout over a large grinding rock used by indigenous people in an area with signage on why it is culturally significant. This criteria is about what can be viewed and interpreted from trail segments funded by this grant plus match only, no other trail segments or no trail segments that will be constructed in the future. Next, we're going to go to page 30. That's all about criteria number 9, sustainable design. Criteria number 9 is at the top of page 10 of the frequently asked questions document. Applicants should list each of the sustainable design features A through J and provide an explanation for each on how the feature will be part of the project. If a sustainable design feature will not be part of a project, the applicant should note that it is not applicable and provide an explanation as to why it is not applicable. Here is an example for D. The project will utilize elevated wooden walkways as a way to minimize trail traffic on endangered native grass and endangered California tiger salamander habitat. For those applicants with rehabilitation projects, a description should be provided on how the improvements will replace and eliminate problem areas while creating sustainable features. As we can see in the scoring rubric, projects will be scored on how well they meet the features listed in A through J. A feature can be marked as not applicable if a feature is marked as not applicable and has an explanation as to why it is not applicable. The applicant's score will not be impacted. The intent of this criteria is to encourage applicants to use sustainable design principles for all aspects: planning, development, construction, rehabbing, etc. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions, and I'm going to pass it over to Christine.
I'm going to jump in real quick, everyone. Thank you. We have a question that comes up every workshop, and it's from John. Good question. Going back to criteria number 5, and if you could go back to criteria number 5, please, Sam. So number 5 asks for you to provide the estimated number of users. So in our chat feature, we just copied and pasted what's on page 8 of your frequently asked questions document. But let me kind of explain the background behind what's going on here. I mean, first of all, we acknowledge that for new trails, it's going to be hard to estimate the average number of users. So you're really just providing your best guess estimate based on what we recommend is just take an average day of what you anticipate would be the average day of use and multiply that by 365. And what Sam's currently doing is he's going to the frequently asked questions document. So this would be, there it is for criteria 5. And then also it says that OGALS does consider the reasonable probability the trail will have high, medium, or low use compared to other statewide applications based on the location of the trail and its intended use. So what we're not going to do is we're not going to take your number and place it on a scale, just because in many of these projects, you're just guessing how many people will come use the project once it's complete. So what we're doing here is we'll consider the number you provide, but we're also going to look at location of the trail and its intended use. If it's in a urban area where there's a high population that can, access the trail from their neighborhoods or workplaces, and it's likely based on the trail route that it will attract high use because of the destinations the trail will take users to, that would definitely be considered. Or in a more remote area, how significant is the natural or cultural access that will be created through the trail? And is it likely that the trail will draw visitation from throughout the region? So we're really looking at probability of how heavily used would the trail be if the project is funded and once it's complete. So I hope that helps. Just give your best guess estimate, but feel free to give some more background about why you believe it's going to be high use. Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Victor. Okay, so now we're going to turn to page 31. Perfect. And this is criteria number 10, which is diversified use. Criteria 10 is also found on page 10 of the FAQ document. For the sake of this criteria, diversified use refers to the greatest number of compatible recreational purposes that may occur on the same trail or trail corridor at the same time. Applicants should explain how the project will provide for multiple recreational uses and/or corridor sharing. It is important to note that more points are gained when a project will have multiple recreational uses. A project with the following will be given greater consideration. A project that will provide the greatest number of compatible uses or innovative recreational trail corridor sharing to accommodate motorized and non-motorized recreational use. A project that will provide for demonstrated, diversified, and compatible trail uses. Diversified uses include, but are not limited to, equestrian, bicycle, cross-country ski, motorcycle, ATV, snowmobile, and pedestrian usage. Pedestrian usage can include walkers, rollerbladers, skaters, wheelchair usage, etc. The trail must be designated for multiple uses, and applicants should include the method for each designation through signage or other means. For example, if a trail is designed for pedestrians only, but bikers use it, it will not qualify for two use types. It must be designated for both bike and pedestrian use through signage or other methods. As you can see on the rubric on this page, that an applicant will gain the most points for a project that includes 3 or more recreational trail uses. Continuing on this page is criteria number 11, and this is including stakeholders in on the project. This is also found on page 10 of the FAQ document. Applicants should discuss how potential users, public agencies, project partners, and volunteers were engaged in the planning and who will continue to be engaged for the implementation of the project. Applicants should answer the following 3 bulleted questions. One of them there is, what methods were used to foster a high degree of participation and human interaction? So a few examples of fostering interaction are conducting trail design walks with the community residents, partners, a local historian, or environmental specialist, planning meetings at community centers or an after-school program. And another question we ask in that other bullet point is, what were the methods of notification? So some notification examples can include that the applicant had volunteers knock on doors to hand out flyers in the neighborhood adjacent to the project. The applicant posted meeting invitations on social media, including on their own webpage and their partner's webpage. The applicant asked a local elementary school if teachers could hand out flyers to students to take home. Also, we would like to know, how were volunteers utilized in designing the project? Also, how will volunteers be utilized in implementing the project? So some examples of these can include that the applicant utilized bilingual volunteers to provide translation services during the planning meetings. The applicant will utilize high school students taking architectural design classes to help design the trail route. or the applicant will utilize volunteers from the local Master Garden Club to assist with hauling soil during trail construction. As you can see in the rubric on this page, maximum points will be given to those applicants who made the most effort to involve the broadest representation of stakeholders for the project planning and implementation. So on the next page, on page 32, perfect, is criteria number 12, and that is consistency with other plans. This criteria can also be found on page 11 of the FAQ document. To be an eligible project, a project should be consistent with the applicant's general plan or an equivalent planning document. Equivalent plans include a city, county, or regional master plan, a statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, otherwise known as SCORP, or the California Recreational Trails Plan. A project that is consistent with more than one plan will gain the most points. A brief response of a few sentences citing which plans the project is consistent with is recommended. RTP law requires this criteria. Therefore, if the applicant does not respond or a project is not consistent with any plan, the project can be determined as ineligible. So continuing on page 32 here, we will find criteria number 13, which is management capacity. This criteria is also found on page 11 of the FAQ document. Applicants should describe the capability of their agency and or their partner's agency's capability to provide for all aspects of the trail management process, including project planning, design, layout, construction, maintenance, and operation. Applicants should incorporate both of those bullet points on the page there and their sub-bullets into their answers for this criteria. So applicants should explain their agency's readiness to complete the proposed project by providing the following information. So applicants should demonstrate their capability to implement other completed trail projects, describe their agency and their partners' agency's trails skills, and describe any trail training that their agency and or their partners' agencies have completed. Applicants should also provide information on how a trail management process is going to be utilized. Those 6 sub-bullet points under that second bullet shows elements of an excellent trail management process. Some of these elements include describing the appropriate upfront planning for the proposed project, explaining the use of appropriate trail design for maximum sustainability, and sharing information about the maintenance and monitoring program that will allow the proposed project to remain open to trail users while maintaining the trail's intended design standards. So next in the guide, we'll go to page 33. And this is criteria number 14, which is the service corps involvement. This criteria can also be found on pages 11 and 12 of the FAQ document. Applicants should contact the California Conservation Corps, the California Association of Local Conservation Corps, or other service corps to discuss and agree upon how the corps could be involved in the proposed project, contingent upon grant award. OGAL supports all corps involvement, whether it is designing the trail, constructing the trail, or maintaining the trail. If the corps will be used for the proposed project, the applicant should provide at least a brief description of when their discussions with the corps occurred and what their agreement covers with the Corps if the grant is awarded. It is also important to note that applicants who contact any of the Corps will gain points even if the Corps cannot participate. As shown earlier during the review of the RTP main webpage, there is a phone number for and a link to the CCC's webpage under partnership opportunities. We cannot stress how important it is to complete the initial step of contacting the Corps as early as possible in order to get a conversation going with and a final response by the Corps before the application deadline. So with that, this concludes the grant criteria technical assistance part of this workshop. So next we're going to dive into the checklist items. And with that, we are going to take a 5-minute break. And we'll see you back in 5 minutes.
Welcome back from break, everyone. I hope you all had a good stretch, refresh your beverage and snacks, and are ready for the RTP checklist items. The application packet requirements and checklist starts on page 19 of the guide. Preparing the application information starts on page 4 of the FAQ document. Applicants should use the checklist on pages 19, 20, 21, and 22 of the guide to organize their applications. Letters of support are not requested. If the applicant agency requires submission of letters of support, please have the letters addressed to the applicant agency. Any letters addressed to OGALS or the department can slow down the review process. Checklist item number 13 on page 6 of the guide is a project proposal which includes the criteria 1 through 14 that we just went over. As Nikki mentioned this earlier, and it is worth repeating, the criteria answers must be completed and finalized at the application deadline. If a checklist item is not applicable, applicants should provide a brief explanation as to why it was not applicable. If the checklist item will not be complete in time for the application deadline, for example, the authorizing resolution won't be signed and ready, then a placeholder that includes an explanation as to why it is incomplete and a timeline that has an expected completion date should be submitted in its place. Now let's take a look at checklist item number 1, the application form on page 23. Information regarding checklist item number 1 can be found on page 4 of the FAQ. A few things to point out for this application form. The form in the guide is fillable. In the top right corner of the form, where the grant request, required match, and total project cost amounts are entered, the applicant should ensure that the amounts shown here match what is entered on the cost estimate form. Match should be a minimum 12%, and matching sources can include state, local, or private funds. The grant scope should be a description of the project that includes only the items to be completed through the total project costs, which is the grant request plus match amount for the project period. No future phases should be entered, and is detailed enough to identify each project element to be accomplished by the grant while being consistent with the cost estimate, CEQA documents, and site plan. An example, the city of Timbuktu will construct a new 1.5-mile paved multi-use trail that includes a trailhead with bathroom facilities and interpretive signage. The next two checklist items, checklist item number 2, site plan, and checklist item number 3, topographic map, are found on page 20 of the guide. They are combined on page 4 of the FAQ document as well. The site plan and topographic map are for development projects. Applicants may combine the site plan and topographic map into one document, as long as all the elements from the instructions on page 20 are present on the document. Next, we have checklist item number 4, the trail log and inventory and reconnaissance notes, which is also found on page 20 of the guide. And checklist item 4 can be found on page 5 of the FAQ document. For unpaved trails, applicants should submit a detailed trail log. For paved trails, trailside, or trailhead facilities, applicants should submit reconnaissance notes or preliminary plans. OGALS provides some tips on trail logs on page 5 of the FAQ. It should be noted that a trail log provides a more accurate basis of cost estimating a trail project. Here are some suggestions. Walk the trail alignment, establish a beginning and ending point, and provide details like stream and drainage points, areas needing realignment, retaining walls, bridge points, causeways, etc. Next, we have checklist item number 5, design standards. This checklist item can also be found on page 5 of the FAQ. Design standards is another checklist item for development projects only. Applicants should submit these 2 items. Item number 1, the specific standard that will be used for the project. Standards can be used from the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, National Park Service, California State Parks, U.S. Forest Service, or another applicable standard. Applicants can use a local city's standards if there is an established set of trail design standards. And item number 2, 1 or more representative samples of the chosen standards for the project. This can include conceptual drawings, logs, plans, etc. I'm going to pass this on to Nikki to continue with the checklist items. Please put any questions you have in the chat.
Thank you so much, Julianne. And I see that the chat has been going crazy, and it looks like Victor wants to address some of the things that have been popping up in there. Victor?
Yeah, just real quick, just a heads up for everyone. After Nikki covers the cost estimate item, Nikki, that's what you're covering next, right? The cost estimate?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. After Nikki covers the cost estimate, Richard and I will add a few answers to questions about match, because we do see there's quite a bit of questions about how the match requirement works. So we will answer those questions live as well for everyone to hear. So go ahead, Nikki, cover the cost estimate, and then we'll talk about match.
All right, just let me know.
Okay.
So we're still on page 20 of the guide. We're going to look at checklist item number 6, as Victor said. We're going to look at that cost estimate. And this coincides with page 5 of the FAQ document. So first, we're going to look at the cost estimate instructions. So we're going to look at both the cost estimate form on page 37 and the eligible cost chart that's on page 39 of the guide. But like I said, we're going to start with those cost estimate instructions that are found on page 36. So items consistent with the grant scope should be listed on this cost estimate form. And you're going to keep in mind here that this is a cost estimate, and applicants should do their best to provide an estimate on costs that will be incurred. Now, please know our office understands that costs do fluctuate, and applicants can add contingency costs by rolling them into the line items that are listed. Applicants should not have a separate line item for contingency. Now, please remember that no project costs are eligible until the date of federal approval and funding authorization. That's something to take a note of. So now we're going to look at that cost estimate form that's found on page 37. So applicants are more than welcome to reformat or change the content here as needed. Only eligible costs are listed on the cost estimate form. And those items listed should be part of that grant scope that is entered on the application form. We can't stress that enough. I'll repeat that a bunch. Applicants should keep in mind that no more than 25% of the grant amount and the required match can be spent on non-construction costs and costs other than land acquisition. And that's found, if you're taking note here, that's found under bullet 3 in the cost estimate instructions on page 36, if you want to ever go back to that. So line items under description of work column there should be part of that grant scope that I mentioned earlier, the grant scope that's on the application form. So for example, the grant scope states construct 1 mile of trail, then the cost estimate should have trail construction costs. So applicants should ensure the grant request amount and the total project cost on this form, the cost estimate, should also mirror what's on the application form. You are always welcome to submit your forms, the application, your cost estimate form, anything, except for checklist item number 13, that proposal, the criteria. You can't submit those to your competitive project officer for review, but the other checklist items you can. We're happy to give any assistance and review things prior to the application deadline. So the RTP grant can be combined with other grants to fund a project where the grant scope is the same. So if you all are considering using maybe the Habitat Conservation Fund and RTP for a trail project, that is allowable. And now we're going to talk match. Now I'm going to ask Victor if you want to talk about something first, or should I go through what I'm going to say first and then you'll answer some questions?
Go ahead, Nikki.
Okay, great. So we are going to stay here on page 37 of the guide, and we're going to take a look at page 5 of the FAQ if you got that with you. So for the match columns on both tables, applicants only need to enter data for the subtotal and total row or boxes. Match does not need to be broken down for each line item, and it is not entered in those shaded areas that you see. And if you look at the last table on the form, as you can see, that very last one, this is where match sources can be listed and should be. Now let's chat about match requirements. And that's on page 15. And here applicants will find all the information needed for match requirements. So match is based on the total cost of the project. The minimum for match is 12%. And the formula for figuring out your match can be found at the bottom of page 15, as you can see there. Match must be committed at the time of application. Future fundraising is not considered a match. And as you can see at the top of page 15, there is a chart, and this chart lists eligible match sources and then the rules regarding that match or any match. So eligible match sources include state, local, and private funds. It can be donated material and services, aka in kind. It can be value of donated land. And match can only be spent on eligible costs that match the grant scope. Indirect costs are not eligible for match. Okay, before I pass over the speaking duties over to Kyle, who's going to cover acquisition schedule and both the eligible and ineligible costs, I'm going to hand it back over to Victor.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nikki. So you can see on the bottom of your screen the easy way to calculate your maximum grant request is you would multiply your total project cost by 0.88, and that will tell you the maximum grant request that you can ask for based on your total project cost, and that's up to $2 million per application. Yesterday we had a question about phasing the project. Let's say that your total project cost is a big project, let's just say $20 million, and you don't have $18 million committed. In that case, if it's possible, we would recommend that you downscope your project to a phase that can be complete with the grant request plus whatever committed funds you have on hand. And again, that's up to a $2 million grant request. So as long as your phase will be something that will be usable by the public, let's say your total project that you envision is going to be your $20 million total project will be a 5-mile trail, but for let's say 2 million, you can create a trailhead staging area plus let's say maybe a half-mile or a mile trail, and it will give enough of an opportunity for the public to make the project worthwhile. Then you can definitely apply for that smaller phase. So again, if you downscope, it has to be a usable phase, a usable end product for the public. The other thing too we'd like to mention is that in some cases, the Habitat Conservation Fund, which also has a trail sub-program, may be a good fit for your project too. And I would encourage you all to look at the Habitat Conservation Fund. Team, if you could post a link on the website to that program page. We do have an application workshop coming up next week for questions and answers session. We also have some webinars posted online for that program. That program has a 50% match requirement. So what you could do in theory is use your recreational trails project as a 50% match for the Habitat Conservation Fund, which is a state fund program. So take a good look at the trail sub-program for the Habitat Conservation Fund. You can always, ask your project officer if your trail project would be eligible for that program as well. And if you need match, that would be a good match source. I will give you a pitch here that the Habitat Conservation Fund was our only undersubscribed program in the past 10 years. Last round, we had less requested than what was available. For Habitat Conservation Fund, quite a bit will be available this year compared to past cycles of that program. So, please take a look at that and consider applying for the Habitat Conservation Fund as well. Now, I'll say that if you do need match and you're applying for the Habitat Conservation Fund, and you need both grants to match each other to make the project whole, we would award both or nothing. We're not going to shortchange your project. So the key here is our goal is to make sure that whatever is awarded will be enough to allow your project to be completed. So keep that in mind as well. We're not going to just fund one if you need both grants to be awarded. Richard, I also saw there's some questions about federal funds being used as match for this RTP program. Can you please add anything else about match that would be helpful that I did not cover?
I think the only thing just to be aware of is that even though this is a federal a program that utilizes federal funding, it's one of the few federal programs that you can use other federal funds to help offset the minimum of 12% match. However, there is a cap. So that cap is with your recreational trails program grant request amount plus the other federal funds. It's capped at 95% of your total project costs. So what that means is that the final 5% match requirement must come from something other than the federal funding source. So just keep that in mind. You have some other federal funds coming in. You could definitely use it to help offset your match to where there is only a 5% match requirement that actually comes from non-federal sources. I think that was about it, Vic.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. So thank you guys for that clarification. We're going to go on to page 38 to check out the acquisition schedule. Thank you, Sam. Those applicants purchasing land will need to use this acquisition schedule. Each row represents one parcel as shown in the first column on the left, where applicants list the parcel number. Applicants can add rows if needed. Moving from the left column to the right, we have acreage. Applicants should list the exact number of acres per parcel listed. And the third column from the left is the estimated date of acquisition, target date for the keys to be handed over, so to speak. The fourth column is the estimated value of the land being acquired. Remember, it needs to be at or below fair market value, and all acquisitions will need to be from a willing seller. Next to that is for listing the estimated value of improvements being acquired. And as you can see in footnote number 2 at the bottom of the page, this refers to buildings or other structures on the land. After that, the next column is the estimated cost of relocation. If an applicant feels they may have this, please talk to the assigned competitive review project officer for your county. And finally, the final column, all the way to the right, is going to be the total estimated cost, which is the combined total of the column for value of land, the value of improvements, and the cost of relocation. Next, we're going to check out the eligible cost chart. While we're discussing the cost estimate, we'll look at the eligible cost charts found on pages 39, 40, and 41. And yes, we are still on page 5 of the frequently asked questions document. All of the eligible cost charts include 2 columns: what the costs are allowed and examples of such costs. As we can see on page 39, applicants will find the eligibility cost charts for acquisition, non-land, and land. On page 40, so on page 40 here, applicants will find the eligibility cost charts for development projects, which are pre-construction and construction. Following that, on page 41, we continue the eligibility cost charts for development projects for construction costs, and I have 2 charts for programmatic projects, which are for motorized trail projects only. On page 42, applicants will find information regarding rules for personnel and employee services. Indirect costs or charges made as a percentage of costs are not eligible. This wraps up checklist item 6, which brings us to checklist item number 7, project location map, which is on page 20. Okay. Down here at the bottom, perfect. So back on here, page 20 in the guide, and still staying on page 5 of the frequently asked questions document, we will find information for the project location map. Applicants should submit a map, either city or county, that allows individuals and reviewers unfamiliar with the area to easily locate the project. Checklist item number 8, photos of the project site. The last checklist item on page 20 and is on page 6 of the frequently asked questions document. Applicants should submit photos of the project site. Photos should be labeled in order to orient the viewer. Applicants should include direction in which the reviewer is looking, along with any other details that might be necessary. For example, you can have a picture of a curve in the trail and label it northeast view of turn 2. Videos, including drone footage, is allowed, but does not and will not take the place of pictures. A tip for taking pictures: take photos that can be used as before photo, so that when the trail is finished, we can take a picture from that same spot and have it be the after photo. This can be beneficial when wanting to show the work that has been done to the project. Please use the chat to ask any questions, and we'll move the workshop over to Christine.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kyle. So now we're going to turn to page 21, where we will find checklist item number 9, which is land ownership. Also, checklist number 9 information can also be found on pages 1 and 6 of the FAQ document. And just to let you know, the title on that FAQ document is land tenure. So it's actually land ownership / tenure. So for RTP, a project can be either an acquisition project or a development project. So for acquisition projects, applicants must provide an acquisition schedule outlining the acreage and parcel numbers to be acquired, an acquisition date, and estimated value of each parcel to be acquired. Also, applicants must provide a parcel map. Finally, an applicant must provide a willing selling letter or other documentation that the property is for sale. It is important to note once again that condemnation is not allowed. For development projects, applicants must certify that they have land tenure and site control of the property. If an applicant owns the property in fee title, an applicant must provide the recordation number from the deed. If the property is under a lease, easement, or any other kind of agreement where the applicant has site control, an applicant must provide documentation verifying that the land tenure requirement has been met. Okay, and so for landowners, we will also include information about the property on the application form. And so let's move to that form on page 23. So that's the application form, and on the bottom there, on the bottom left box, you can see the writing where it says, for development project, land tenure is blank acres. Applicants should list the total number of acres of the entire project and also the total number of acres owned in fee simple on the next line there. In addition, landowners will also enter the recordation numbers found on the deed. In the same box, bottom left box, applicants who will be leasing land will include the number of acres that will be leased and for how long the lease is. For acquisition projects, on that bottom right box is where applicants should list the total number of acres that will be acquired for the entire project, and also the number of acres either acquired in fee simple or other than fee simple. So now we're going to turn back to page 21. And so, as previously mentioned, applicants who will be leasing land will need to provide an agreement they have with the landowner that provides sufficient site control for their proposed project. Drafting, negotiating, and executing lease agreements can be very time-consuming. Lease agreements can be reviewed in advance of the application. Applicants should contact their project officer or Richard Rendon, who is the State Trails Administrator, to obtain a land tenure checklist and to discuss the potential lease. Applicants can utilize the checklist when drafting or editing their lease, and they can complete the checklist and send it along with the lease over to their project officer for further discussion. Lastly, there are requirements for the length of a lease agreement. Applicants who are leasing land are required to enter into the following agreement length. So grants up to and including $100,000 require at least a 10-year lease. Grants greater than $100,000 require at least a 20-year lease. So continuing on page 21 is checklist item number 10, which is the California Environmental Quality Act, otherwise known as CEQA. This checklist item is also found on page 6 of the FAQ document. Applicants must demonstrate compliance with CEQA by the application deadline. This is done by providing a copy of the notice of exemption or notice of determination or other CEQA documentation that the proposed project has been approved by the lead agency. In addition, the applicant must provide a copy of the completed CEQA compliance certification form. It is important to note that all CEQA documentation must be consistent with the grant scope. If CEQA is not completed by the application deadline, please provide a timeline for when the CEQA requirements will be completed. Compliance with CEQA must be finished prior to RTP grant recommendations being made by our department. It should be noted that federal applicants and projects that will be on federal land must comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA. So continuing on this page, is checklist item number 11, which is the authorizing resolution or agency letter. This checklist item is also found on page 6 of the FAQ document. The authorizing resolution form can be found on page 35. And this form should be submitted with the application. So on the screen is the resolution. This template has been updated and can be found on the RTP website. Applicants can also contact their competitive review officer to have the template emailed to them. We will put the link to the resolution in the chat. The applicant may reformat the resolution. However, it's important to note that any changes to the resolution language requires the department's approval, and this may also lead to legal review. Items 1 through 6 must be present within the resolution. The position designated in the resolution, which is on that number 5, must sign all the application packet forms. Please be sure to put a position title in that spot, such as, for example, city manager or public works director, and not the current position's holder's name. This way, if the person leaves the position, we don't have to amend the resolution. Instead, the designated position will get transferred to the next person in that position. Federal or state agency applicants will submit an agency letter in lieu of an authorizing resolution. So with that, I will move the webinar over to Julianne.
Oh, it looks like Julianne's sound went off. So I think Kyle is going to be able to take over here, right?
Yep, no problem. Yep, thanks, Christine. So next we're moving on to checklist item number 12, project summary. So here on page 21 in the guide and remaining on page 6 of the frequently asked questions document, we have the project summary. The summary should explain the project and its enhancements. The summary is not scored and does not need to be very detailed. Next is checklist item number 13, the project proposal. We can find this at the bottom of page 21 in the guide and also on page 6 of the frequently asked questions document. As mentioned earlier, this checklist item must be completed and finalized at the time of application. The project proposal includes all project criteria that we went over earlier. It is critical that this checklist item be completed by the deadline, as this is how the application is scored. The project proposal is due by June 5th, 2023 by 5 p.m. through the online application portal submittable. Next is checklist item number 14, lease and agreements. This is the last checklist item on page 21, and for leases and agreements that do not pertain to land tenure. For example, an agreement the applicant has with ranchers for cattle to graze the property, a concessions agreement, stewardship MOUs, etc. Applicants should label each lease and agreement clearly. Moving on to page 22, we will review the final 3 checklist items, 15, 16, and 17. Thanks, Sam. Checklist number 15, required regulatory permits. Applicants should provide a list of existing and additional required permits, along with their status and expected date of approval. Next is checklist item number 16, nonprofit requirements. This is at the bottom of page 6 in the frequently asked questions document. If an applicant is a nonprofit organization, they must submit the following items: articles of incorporation, mission statement, most recent annual report and budget, verification of 501c3 status, IRS documentation. If an applicant needs that, then they can find it on the IRS website. The last two bullet points, fidelity bond and payee data record, are non-applicable at the time of application. And finally, checklist item number 17. This is no longer applicable for the application process and can be crossed out. This is the end of the checklist items. Please put any questions in the chat. I'm going to pass it over to Rich, who will provide information on the next steps.
Thank you, Kyle. So just to reorient everyone on where we are at this point, why don't we go ahead and take another look at the timeline here. So as you may remember, that that most of these dates are determined by when the Federal Highway Administration approves the project. So where are we now? We are again February, March of 2023. We just finished our last application webinar. So between now and June 15th, 2023 by 5:00 p.m. with your applications submitted online through our submittable online application portal. Now is your time to do many things. One of them is, just because we're done with this webinar does not mean that we are done with helping you out with technical assistance. From this day through June 15th, feel free to contact your assigned competitive review project officer. If you have any questions regarding the Recreational Trails Program project that you're looking to submit, you can contact them via phone, email, requesting a Teams meeting with them. And if there are any questions that are policy in nature or anything like that, we can definitely have a conversation with me and our management team regarding those. So there's that. There's also our RTP webpage, which has a lot of information that can be used for your application. One is that is where our application guide that we went over today is housed. Also, the frequently asked questions document, there is a link there where you can go ahead and download those if you haven't done so already. There is the template for the authorizing resolution on that. And also, once the application deadline passes, there's also another form of technical assistance that we do provide, and that is if there's any further information that we may need regarding your application, such as signatures or anything like that on forms or questions about your forms, our project officers are highly trained and they will contact you for further information. So what does this mean? It means that unlike many other programs throughout the state, because there's a missignature or the right information is not there, we don't kick you out of the process. Our goal as an office and our ethos is that we want to have everybody put their best foot forward, and in doing so, we aim to help you get all your forms and everything ready to roll in case your project is recommended for funding. The one exception to that rule is the project selection criteria responses. Those are frozen in time at the time you hit the submit button on June 15th by 5:00 p.m. And those cannot be changed anytime after that date. And also, I'd like to kind of go back in terms of the technical assistance prior to that date. Our project officers can help you with any part of your application forms or any questions you may have. The one thing that they cannot comment on and are helping you with the responses to your to the criteria. So that is on your, that has to be done by you, and our project officers are cannot help you with those responses. But anything outside of the project proposal responses is fair game for questions to be asked or any of that other stuff. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to your applications. And I will now turn it over to Cedric for a closing statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. First of all, thank you again for being a part of today's presentation. Our surveys showed that California state trails provide experiences that attract more users than any other type of facilities. Whether it's hiking on a narrow backcountry trail or bicycling on a paved multi-use trail, our residents really value and utilize these trail systems to their advantage. Thank you for participating again in today's webinar. All the materials we have covered within this webinar are also located on our website, and I'll give that to you. It's at www.parks.ca.gov/RTPNM. Please stay in touch and contact with your competitive project officer. If you have any questions, please make sure that you contact them either directly or through email. We want to make certain that you're putting your best foot forward, and anything we can do to facilitate that, we're going to do. Finally, let me just say that we will keep open for additional questions and answers here. You can do this by using the hand raise option. Rich will monitor the hand raising and calls for participants, and Nikki will unraise hands that have been answered. For those on the phone, you can dial in by using *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please be aware that there will be a slight pause before you make that connection. Again, we want to thank you for your participation today. We hope that this webinar is of value to you, that we will see come June 15th, that we'll see extraordinary projects coming forward. Anything, again, we can do to help make certain that this isn't your last contact with us, and we look forward to seeing your creative, innovative program projects coming forward in the near future. And now I'll turn it back over to Richard, and we'll take any questions that you may have. We'll go live mic, so simply raise your hand. If you feel more comfortable, you can continue to use the chat. We'll continue to monitor that. But this is an opportunity to ask those specific questions, and hopefully we'll be able to give you the answers you're looking for. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Cedric. So feel free to raise your hand, and I will definitely call on you if you have any questions that were not that were not in the chat. So now is your time to fire away at us. Thanks.
And I'll cover a few questions from John. So there's a few questions that are definitely related to other state programs and funding initiatives. So one question from John was whether the project's proximity to a disadvantaged or underserved community is considered in the review, such as a term some of you may be familiar with, which is disadvantaged community, defined as like 80% of the statewide median household income. And the answer is no. There is not a income criteria in this program. So the project selection criteria section that the team covered shows how applications will be ranked. Secondly, the second question from John is asking if the project does not have a housing element approved by the state, will that affect the grant award recommendation? And the answer is also no. This is not related to any housing funding. So again, it looks at the project selection criteria that we cover today as what is being used to rank your application. Okay, thank you.
Barbara, go ahead.
We have a question from Barbara. Rich, can you get that one from Barbara?
Yes. Barbara,
The past, what is the average award and how many entities were awarded? I think I'd probably say in recent rounds, the average award is right around 1 million, right, Rich?
Pretty
Roughly.
close to 1 million. I think this last round we had $4.68 million available, and we funded 7 projects. So it's roughly roughly about 500,000-600,000
Okay,
this
thanks,
last
Rich.
round. Yeah.
But there's, within that list, you'll see a range of, I think the lowest grant is about 280,000, and I think there's one that was about 1.7. Well, I see a 1.4 million.
Right.
Okay, so definitely, I know where you're going, Barbara. A $2 million grant amount under this program would definitely be considered high. It looks like the sweet spot in the past is somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million, but it is possible that a $2 million grant could be awarded. So good question, Barbara. Okay, and I think someone had their hand up, right, Rich?
It was Barbara. Did you have another question, Barbara?
No, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we will hang out and stay here until all questions have been answered. So let's plan on, we'll stay here until 2:20 and we'll close at 2:20 unless there are more questions. Okay, I see a hand up from Alyssa. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Hi, so this is more of a general OGALS type question, not necessarily specific for this program, but we often end up with projects that we want to submit applications for, but maybe haven't gotten to the point of completing CEQA yet, and trying to find the funding to do that initial sort of master planning, conceptual planning, and CEQA is a little bit of a challenge for us. Do you all know of any other resources for that type of planning, grants for that type of planning to get us through CEQA?
Yeah, good question. We do not know of any planning grants only that would allow for just pre-construction. Team, go ahead and add anything you'd like. Richards, any other advice there about CEQA costs? I mean, I do know if the grant's awarded, of course, those costs could be reimbursed, but can you add anything else, Richard?
Yeah, no, I mean, like in the 22 years I've been in the office, I've had that question many a times, and I'm still looking for the pot of gold for the planning, to like help out with those planning costs only, and unfortunately, it's ever elusive for me. So, sorry, I don't know of any. I'm continuously researching it, and I have yet to find it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry about
Thanks
that,
for
Alyssa.
no problem. Thanks for the workshop today.
No problem.
you.
Thank you.
Hey, Wendy.
Hi, thanks. Pardon my lack of knowledge on this, but I was reading through it and it said one of the requirements for eligibility is to meet the ADA requirements. And so we're looking at, doing a trail that goes through open space that would be, just a dirt trail. So, we wouldn't be able to meet the grade or even the width of that. So how do we go about showing that it's going to be, follow the ADA accessibility rules when it's in open space?
Excellent question. Now, will your trail be paved or natural surface?
It's actually, it's the Bay Ridge Trail. So it already somewhat exists, but it's in very poor shape, and it has, the rains have eroded away a lot of the trail, and it's become somewhat unusable. So we definitely need to renovate it. So it's not a paved trail. It is a dirt trail.
Okay. Richard, go ahead and answer. And in the meanwhile, I will copy and paste the frequently asked questions that address both non-paved and paved. But any advice you can give would be helpful.
Sure, no problem. So Wendy, the trail, since it's natural, it's more of a natural soft surface trail that is not like a compacted DG or anything like that. Those are not subject to ADA requirements. Those ADAs usually reserved for more of a built environment, such as trailheads and that type of stuff, and also like class 1 bike trails. Like so things like that. So what it is subject to are the FAB guidelines, and what we recommend for people is to try to make your trail as accessible as possible for as many people as possible, and only use the Federal Access Board departures when it's as a last resort. So if you can get your trail as accessible from like a trail that as far as you can, and you get to a point where you absolutely cannot do anything and you have to use one of these FAB departures, then that's generally what we recommend. It is as a last resort. And I think Victor's going to put that into the chat. And so pretty much as Kyle mentioned, it's when you can use those departures is when it's not practicable. Because the terrain or prevailing construction practices will not allow for it to take place. And those types of things. Now, or if there's mandates with Endangered Species Act or other federal or state laws, anything that would fundamentally alter a site's function or purpose, or pretty much carving up a hillside for the sake of making it accessible, but you also lose the aesthetics of the area in which you want to put a trail. And so things like that, I would definitely, encourage you to try to think of every alternative possible prior to using those. And if that still doesn't work, then by all means, go ahead and use one of those FAB departures.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Wendy.
Thanks for the question. It's a key question.
Excellent. Good question. Yes.
So I posted what you see on your screen as well. This is from page 8 through 9 of the questions and answers document. So this is also what Richard covered. What have you seen, Richard, in past applications? I know this criteria number 6 is definitely one where we get some hit or miss responses. You'll see everyone here that we've structured our guidance based on whether it's a non-paved or paved trail. Richard, can you kind of summarize some of the issues you saw in prior applications with how the response is maybe incomplete in the past for this criteria number 6?
Sure. I would say probably the number one thing that I've seen throughout the years is applicants don't directly respond to FAB guidelines. They kind of talk around it, and they kind of talk about more about criteria 7 in a way, which is also about accessibility to the trail. This is about on-trail accessibility. So and a lot of the questions that we've seen today and yesterday regarding this, it's very easy to kind of think, oh, they're talking about access on the trail, therefore it's ADA only. So I'll urge you that if you have any questions about the FAB guidelines or ADA, contact your project officer and they can definitely help you. If I need to be pulled in, I'm more than willing to be pulled in to those conversations. But I would say that if you're doing a non-paved trail, definitely ensure that you are talking about the Federal Access Board guidelines. And if you have to use it as a last resort, any departures, if you are doing paved trails, then you have to follow the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Official guidelines, which is housed under Caltrans. You can always find it there, and so that is more of a is a built environment. So those would need to be subject to a ADA type requirements. Ashley.
Yeah, I have kind of a strange question for you guys. Our wilderness park that we have in our city here was recently affected by the wildfires, and then we've obviously had a lot of rain, and so we've had feet and feet of mudslides. We've been forced to close our park and all the trails there because of it. So we're looking at applying for this in a larger effort to renovate our park and get it back and open for people. As far as the landscaping and habitat restoration goes, would that mean that we'd be able to build like a retaining wall or things like that to keep the mud flows from coming back onto the trails for the future, or would that not be covered under this?
So in terms of those types of things, your project must include trail work. So
Right.
so if you're recutting your trail or whatever you're doing, and you're having trouble with armoring one side of your trail, you can definitely armor it with native landscaping to help solidify the upper side of the trail cut. You can use retaining walls. You can use any type of structure needed in order to prevent that from happening. But that definitely has to be directly adjacent to the trail itself, and to prevent other types of environmental issues going on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Dana?
Hello, good afternoon. I also have somewhat of a unique question. We are a special water district, and we were approached by the city that we serve. They are constructing a trail, rehabilitating a portion of it and constructing the rest of it. It's about a 5-mile trail. They approached us because we do have property that borders that trail, and they wanted to use it as a trailhead facility or indoor staging area. Our idea is to submit this application separately from the city. Would there be any opposition to that or issues with that?
I would say definitely talk to the city about it, but the trailhead is all on your property, or the proposed
Yes.
trailhead is going to be all on your, and they want to redo 5 miles of trail that kind of butts up to your property, but not dips into your property, correct?
Correct. Their initial request to us was to provide them with the lease. After we met with them, we discussed our willingness to just go ahead and incorporate it on our own and get the grant on our own. We've been pretty successful with grants lately, so I think we're just kind of thinking we're going to have more luck. But we also have, I guess you could call it a public social media campaign, and just kind of a theme that we've been using. And so we want to ensure that because it is water district property, we want to ensure that still remains. So they're aware that this is our attempt, and they're okay with that. They just want to make sure they have that trailhead. But as far as this grant is concerned, I wanted to ensure that if we submit it just for that trailhead that will lead into their trail, we'd be okay with that.
Yes, you can definitely do that. And I want to say on, let me see here, on page 25,
Okay.
of the application guide, the very last bullet down there. Talks about that if you're going to apply for a trailhead facility, that he's scored the same as the type of trail it serves. So when you are responding to the criteria, just keep in mind of the type of trail that trailhead is going to serve when
Okay.
you're responding to the questions.
Okay, perfect. And now, would there be any issue? As far as I'm concerned, they're also submitting a application for this grant. Would that be any conflict, or would it go along? I believe someone mentioned earlier that it's one of those things. You know, as long as they get awarded, then we're okay. They're not going to do just one or the other.
Right. So for this, both definitely will be considered. There's nothing precluding you and the city from applying for the grant and potentially getting it. But you know, I mean, we're not going to know until we see the lay of the land coming in.
Right. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. So looks like Barbara had a question about, is this a highly competitive grant? So the Rec Trails program last couple rounds have been competitive. So last year we had 50 applications for about $39 million. So roughly, you know, with $4.68 million available. So it was roughly about 8.5, 9 to 1 in terms of dollars asked versus dollars available. So it is it falls in line with many of our other programs in terms of asks for funding. The only one is the one that Victor mentioned that was undersubscribed, and that was the Habitat Conservation Fund. So if you want to take a look at that one, it is a dollar for dollar match, but there is approximately $6.68 million available for this round, which also has a deadline of June 15th of 2020. That one, I think we only received like 12 applications in last year, and we funded pretty much all of them, if not all of them. So if you want a target-rich environment, definitely say, and you have the dollar for dollar match, I would definitely say the HCF Trails sub-program would be a really good fit for a lot of these soft surface trails and those types of things. Do we have any other questions?
I just want to emphasize on what Richard just said. I mean, when you think about it, it's pretty mind-boggling. The Habitat Conservation Fund makes just about the same amount available as the Recreational Trails program, but only about 10% is requested compared to the Recreational Trails program. So I just posted that about roughly 30 to 50 million is requested per cycle through this Recreational Trails non-motorized program, while the Habitat Conservation Fund is about 10% of that amount in terms of how much is requested per cycle. So we would like to see, you know, some more applications coming in through the Habitat Conservation Fund program. Maybe one difference is the Habitat Conservation Fund program does require a larger match percentage at 50%, where, you know, recreational trails can fund up to 88% of your total project. So that may be one reason why we get more requests through this program than the Habitat Conservation Fund.
But I think the other part of that too, Vic, is that the Habitat Conservation Fund is a state program. So there's no phase two of having to go through federal requirements. So, that's also another food for thought for everyone on this webinar too, that it's a little bit more direct line of us approving a project and getting it out to you more quickly. And you don't have that second step of having to go through the NEPA Section 106 and listing your project on the local transportation improvement plan. So that's just a little food for thought for those of you out there too.
Yeah, great point, Richard. And then we had a question here about eligible applicants for the Habitat Conservation Fund Trails Program. And you are correct, nonprofits are not eligible. Eligible applicants are basically local government, cities, counties, and districts as defined on page 45 of the HCF guide. And districts are basically like regional park and open space districts and special local park districts. So Habitat Conservation Fund is local park agencies, city, county, and special districts in terms of eligible applicants. So yes, John, you are correct. Okay, any more questions? Okay, we will stay to 2:40 and we'll close the webinar at 2:40 unless there are more questions at that time. So we'll stay here for a few more minutes. Oh, John, I would say, going back to your question about being a nonprofit and Habitat Conservation Fund, um, if there's a trail which is owned by a city, county, or local park district, regional park district, open space district, one possibility is partnering. So there may be a potential trail project on property owned by an eligible local government agency, and your nonprofit could be a partner in that project through the Habitat Conservation Fund. So that's something to consider, of course. Oh, okay, great. Thank you, John. I see your comments. Thank you. All right, everyone, 1 minute warning. We will close at 2:40 unless there are more questions. Thank you. All right, team, go ahead and stop the recording, and the workshop is closed.